Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, we're throwing it back with an audio-only episode that feels more relevant than ever. COP30 is just around the corner, and this year, Brazil is hosting the UN's big climate summit. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva sees it as a chance to shine. He wants to be seen as a global leader on the environment. The summit will take place in Belém, the gateway to the Amazon. But behind the scenes, political tension is brewing in Brazil. A bill nicknamed the Deforestation Law has sparked heated debate. It's been 20 years in the making. Critics say it could tear down decades of environmental protections. The bill could open the door to controversial projects, like drilling for oil in the Amazon riverbed. Activists warn it could trigger a dangerous oil rush. Lula also wants to repave a road through one of the best preserved parts of the rainforest. Still, if there's one thing Lula can point to, it's Brazil's progress on deforestation. That might be his strongest card to play at COP30. Now, a quick note before we dive in. All titles, dates, and references in this episode are from the time this originally aired. Enjoy.
Today, will Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, fulfill his promise to stop the Amazon rainforest from shrinking by 2030?
Last year, 8 trees were cut down per second.
The progress he's made is undeniable, but the challenge is colossal. I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. The Amazon is the biggest forest on our planet, and in some ways, the most important. Without it, global temperatures would rise even faster than they are now, and the Amazonian region would get up to 4.5 degrees hotter. That's Celsius, making it practically uninhabitable.
My name is Constance Malleret. I'm a freelance journalist covering Brazil, and I'm speaking to you from Rio de Janeiro.
Great. We're so happy to have you here with us. So let's dive right into it. During former President Jair Bolsonaro's far-right administration, deforestation surged to a 12-year high. Now, fast forward to today, a year and a half into President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's administration, how have things evolved on the ground in the Amazon?
I think, first of all, I want to stress that you can't really overstate how bad things were under Bolsonaro. And that's because, as President Bolsonaro created an environment of impunity in the Amazon, which emboldened the illegal loggers, the illegal gold miners, and illegal land grabbers to cut down the forest, and knowing that they would probably not face any consequences for that. So he just sort of generally created this anti-environmental, political, and institutional context.
From the sky, large swaths of Brazil's Amazon are increasingly destroyed by fires and logging. And it's getting worse. It's the highest level in 12 years.
And so it's in this situation that Lula returns to power, promising that he will zero illegal deforestation by 2030, promising to put the fight against climate change at the center of his presidency.
Because if there is no future for the Amazon and its people, there will also be no future for the planet. We will prove that.
So Lula's election and Lula's return to power was, first of all, a change in paradigm, a moment of hope for everyone in the Amazon, and that things were going to change. And we've seen that happen, first of all, in Brasilia, in the capital where all the decisions are taken. He appointed a respected environmentalist, Marina Silva, to lead the Environment Ministry. He's given the environmental agencies a mandate to actually do their work and fight forest loss on the ground. And the results that we've seen come from that is that deforestation fell dramatically in just the first year of his presidency.
So he set some really ambitious plans to cut the deforestation rate, and by and large, it's worked. What were the specific policies?
First of all, directing funding and personnel where they're needed. Bolsonaro completely gutted the environmental agencies, and that, they're slowly recovering from that under Lula. So you have people on the ground again, going after illegal deforestation, destroying the machinery that's used in illegal mining, for example, issuing the fines to people who don't respect environmental laws. Another really important step that was taken just before Lula took power, actually, but, that he can be credited for, is the reactivation of the Amazon Fund, which other countries contribute to, which is directed towards conservation projects in the Amazon. And I'd say a third element is also starting to look at cooperation between the different levels of government, because Brazil's a federal state. So it's all very well having someone in Brasilia saying we're going to end deforestation. But if you're not working with the state governments, the state police forces, and also the municipal governments who are responsible for part of the environmental law enforcement for local laws, then that's not going to work.
This is a great example of how policies actually do matter and politics do matter. I'm saying that the Amazon's deforestation rate has been cut in half is really encouraging. It's good news. We don't always get to report on good news. At the same time, a lot of the rainforest is still being destroyed. I mean, in 2023 alone, an area equivalent to half the size of Lebanon was lost for good. Constance, what do you attribute this to, and what more needs to be done?
I think we do have to highlight that the challenge is immense. So we have seen a 50% drop in deforestation in a year, but the starting point was appalling. Map Biomas, which is a mapping initiative here, calculated that last year 8 trees were cut down per second in the Amazon. So
wow, that's quite a number. 8 trees every 10 seconds are cut down? Is that what you said?
Every second.
Every second. 8 trees every second are cut down. It's hard to get your head around.
Yes, so the challenges are coming from different areas. One of them is within the government itself. One of the reasons that there was such a successful results last year. But actually, since the start of this year, there's been a strike among environmental workers, which means that work in the field has essentially been halted since the start of the year. And the Union of Environmental Workers represents these striking workers have complained that the budget for fighting fire specifically has been cut by 24% this year. And that has contributed to a surge in wildfires that's been recorded in the first few months of 2024. I don't think the government actually confirmed this budget cut.
In pockets of northern Brazil, fire is sucking the life out of the rainforest. In one province, a record number of fires in February nearly eclipsed all of last year.
So there are personnel issues?
There are personnel issues. There are climate reasons as well. The weather is drier, the weather is hotter. That means that the Amazon is more likely to catch fire, that if there is a fire, it's more likely to spread and it's harder to put out. And just to sort of explain the link between forest fires and deforestation, fire is used by traditional communities in the Amazon to manage their agricultural plots, but it's more often connected to illegal deforestation because, for example, someone will clear a plot of land, cut down the trees, and then set fire to it to prepare it for pasture afterwards.
So another thing Lula's doing to prevent deforestation is aiming to build an international police center in the Amazon.
Brazilian President Lula da Silva has urged his government to speed up actions to combat organized crimes in the Amazon.
Which seems like a rather surprising way to address the problem. What will that police center be doing for the environment?
So it might seem like a surprising way, but it's not if you think that deforestation is a type of environmental crime, and that involved in that environmental crime, you have extremely powerful organized crime organizations, which are mainly drug trafficking organizations.
The rainforest is being used as a conduit for drug trafficking. The crimes have contributed to its destruction.
Since they became entrenched in the Amazon in the last decade or so, controlling drug smuggling routes, they've also entered other types of environmental crime, like illegal gold mining, for example. We know that Brazil's biggest criminal organization was involved in illegal gold mining on indigenous territory, or is perhaps still involved.
What is that connection then between organized crime and deforestation and gold mining? How does gold mining actually contribute to deforestation?
So gold mining, back in the day, you used to have a small illegal gold miner with his gold pan going into rivers and trying to find little bits of gold, right? Nowadays, gold mining happens on an industrial scale. I think it's Greenpeace has done a lot of investigations, a lot of flyovers identifying these huge diggers, at the heart of protected indigenous land where that kind of activity is completely illegal. And that requires a huge amount of financing behind it, right? And this is something which these criminal groups have. So they might be involved through providing financing, through providing equipment. They might be involved through providing security for hire, hitmen for hire. And of course, for them, anywhere where the state has less control is advantageous to their activities, their principal activity, which is drug trafficking, but any other kind of commodity they're trying to move illegally. And a lot of those commodities will be linked to cutting down the forest.
How this crime hit close to home for Constance and her colleagues. That's after the break. All right, Constance, this connection between the rainforest and organized crime is actually an intimate one for you. You were working with The Guardian in 2022 when their journalists Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira, a Brazilian activist, were killed in the Amazon as they were reporting on deforestation.
After a 10-day search that many criticized for being too little, too late, there's little question that British journalist Dom Phillips and Brazilian indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were murdered.
Since then, The Guardian has spearheaded an investigation into organized crime and the links to resource extraction as a way to keep the story alive. Constance, what have you learned so far from that investigation?
I think, first of all, we need to say that what Dom and Bruno's murders did was really shine a light on the dangers of working in the Amazon, not just for the international community, but for many people in Brazil as well, who have no idea what's going on deep inside the rainforest. And, unfortunately, they weren't the first victims of the kind. They haven't been the last. A firefighter was just shot dead in the state of Tocantins, probably for his work. But the fact that we're talking about Dom, who was a renowned and well-respected international journalist, means that there was this international outcry that we were able to give visibility to this case. And what the Bruno and Dom project has done since is really try and continue telling the stories of the people on the ground. So the indigenous forest defenders who are fighting off land invaders, the environmentalists, the local journalists, who are fighting and exposing all the different interests, be they criminal, political, corporate, which are driving forest destruction.
And what are some of the figures that you all have been able to uncover as a result of the Bruno and Dom project?
I think at a national level, homicides have been falling, deadly violence has been falling. But if you look at the numbers in the Amazon states, it's going completely opposite direction.
And did you know Dom and Bruno?
I didn't know Dom personally, but I moved to Brazil shortly before he was killed, and he was actually one of the first people to give me advice over the phone and to help me meet a lot of my fellow journalists here. So I owe a lot of my work and life in Brazil to him, despite never having had the privilege of meeting him personally.
Wow. It's really meaningful then that you're continuing to do this kind of work.
Oh, it's a real honor.
Bruno Pereira was an activist, and he was also an expert on Brazil's indigenous people. The Amazon hosts more than 1 million indigenous people. How are they involved in the preservation of their land?
Well, there's a very easy answer to that, which is we know that protecting indigenous land helps keep the forest standing. That's been proven. Indigenous land that is given the legal protection it needs is more forested, is better forested, and sees less forest clearance than the rest of the Amazon. The challenge is guaranteeing the protection to these lands. Brazil does have legal mechanisms in place. Indigenous rights are guaranteed in the constitution. But in practice, that is not always easy to enforce. I think the most emblematic example of that was the Yanomami crisis last year, which have been under terrible attack from illegal gold miners and have been suffering the consequence of that, not just through violence, but also through illness, through disease, through mercury poisoning.
The gold miners want the Yanomami people gone, and federal police have even opened an investigation of possible genocide linked to the abuse of the Yanomami and their resources.
Both old and young Yanomami have been dying in their villages from hunger and disease, despite living on protected land the size of Portugal in the heart of the Amazon rainforest.
And so one of Lula's first challenges was to respond to that emergency and provide not just military personnel, for example, to try and turf out these illegal gold miners, but also health resources, social resources. That was the most visible case, but it's a scenario that we've seen repeated in other indigenous lands around Brazil. He was elected with strong support from the indigenous movement. He created a ministry for indigenous peoples and appointed an indigenous woman, Sonia, to lead it. And these were all extremely important symbolic moves. But in practice, a year and a half into his term, Congress has approved a law which threatens indigenous land rights.
For the indigenous peoples here at the camp in Brasilia and across the country, the new law represents a watershed moment. It weakens their claims to their ancestral lands, saying these can only be recognised.
Few indigenous territories have been officially demarcated, and there's a sense of disappointment with what's been achieved so far.
We were just discussing, how Brazil might not be doing enough to protect the rainforest. But at the end of the day, the Amazon is not only Brazil's. It's been called the lungs of the planet, and several nations are now part of the Amazon Fund. But Lula says that some of the international efforts are lagging. Can you tell us more about the international dimension of Amazon preservation?
Yeah, so of course, when we talk about the Amazon, everyone looks to Brazil because Brazil is home to 60% of the rainforest, but there are 8 other countries that share stewardship. And so, first of all, I'd say that cooperation at a regional level between the different Amazon countries is a necessary part of Amazon conservation, right? Because, for example, Brazil has made progress on reducing deforestation, as has Colombia, but Bolivia is going in the other direction. And the forest itself, it doesn't really care about those land borders or, who is responsible for protecting the western part or the northern part. If part of the biome is being destroyed, that can have, very serious impacts on the rest of the ecosystem. And so I think a coordinated effort on that front is an important step, and one that's not been easy. Lula did host a summit of Amazon countries last year, but it didn't produce any results on, targets for ending deforestation or targets for vetoing oil exploration, for example. So in that sense, it was a bit of a disappointment. And then if we look beyond the region, you have the Amazon Fund, for example, which has been reprised under Lula and which used to be funded by just 2 European countries. And now you have, I think, nearly a dozen countries which have contributed or pledged to contribute to the fund, which goes towards various conservation projects. It's going towards this new international police center you mentioned earlier. So in terms of action on the ground, that's an important source of financing. But, Lula and other leaders from the global south and nations that are particularly vulnerable to climate change, they want more. They want the rich countries to really, put the money where their mouth is and provide a lot more investment and financing to help developing countries protect their forests.
So I understand Lula had a lot of catching up to do after the last administration. And his efforts have yielded results. He's getting a lot of credit internationally for these efforts to lead the fight against Amazon deforestation and telling international leaders that they need to get to work. But if we zoom in, Constance, do you think he's doing everything he can?
I think the short answer to that is no. Lula definitely understands the importance of fighting climate change. Lula's main focus has always been social policy, reducing poverty. And he understands that if we don't tackle climate change, we're not going to be able to tackle poverty, neither in Brazil or at a global level. However, he remains, a president from the more traditional left, a former union leader, a developmentalist at heart. And you see that in the fact that he continues to voice more or less overt support for projects, infrastructure projects like paving a road through the Amazon. And we know that if that road in the south of the Amazon is paved, it will open the doors to deforestation alongside it. He's also not said he won't explore oil near the mouth of the Amazon River. His government has held tenders for oil contracts within the Amazon. So you have a lot of things like that, which, many people would argue just aren't coherent with this vision Lula also has of Brazil being a leader in climate discussions internationally and a leader also in the green economy.
One last thing. Lula has warned that his term was only 4 years and that his successor could very well do nothing about Amazon preservation. I mean, this is a challenge that all administrations face. Is there a chance that we can go back to the Bolsonaro days?
I fear that there is. And you just have to look at the political pressures that Lula faces now. You have a very conservative Congress, which in large part is aligned with the interests of the agribusiness lobby. And the agribusiness lobby in Brazil, despite the fact that it would actually be better for them if the Amazon was still standing, because we know that the Amazon plays a vital role in regulating, for example, rain patterns throughout South America. And without rainfall, Brazilian agriculture is nothing. But despite this, the agribusiness lobby is, one of the louder voices pushing for these infrastructure projects, for the railway line, which will allow them to export their soya more rapidly, for the forest clearing that will allow them to plant more soya fields or pasture for cattle. And in line with these interests, we see Congress now, where Lula doesn't have, a working majority, already pushing for bills for projects which would cater to those interests rather than an environmental agenda. And so if this is already the case now, when we do have a government that is, in theory at least, committed to pursuing, a strong climate agenda, then we can very easily imagine that if Brazil elects a president, whether on the right or the left, who is less committed to that in 2026, that we will see a rollback on Amazon conservation efforts.
Constance, thank you so much for all of this reporting that you're doing and for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Natasha. Thanks for having me.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Marcos Bartolomé with Chloe Kylene, Sonia Bhagat, Manahil Naveed, Noor Wazwaz, and me, Natasha Del Toro. In for Malika Bilal. This episode was edited by Amy Walters. The Take production team is Amy Walters, Ashish Malhotra, Catherine Nouhan, Chloe Kylene, David Enders, Duha Mossad, Khalid Sultan, Manahil Naveed, Marcos Bartolomé, Mohamed Zain Shafi Khan, Noor Wazwaz, Sarí el-Khalili, Sonia Bhagat, Tamara Khandaker. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.